In this very special edition of The Lead on News 24, investigative journalist Jeff Wicks asks, did Gauteng Health Department corruption whistleblower Babita Deokaran die in vain?
Her sacrifice has led to the dismantling of one of the most complex extraction and money laundering syndicates we've ever seen, which has been focused on state procurement. And in essence, if she had not been killed, and if we had not pushed the story to the front of people's minds, those syndicates would still be in operation, feasting at the Tembisa Hospital trough.
The 23rd of August this month marks 4 years since her murder at the hands of hired guns, shortly after exposing and halting mammoth graft at Tembisa Hospital.
The UK have a National Whistleblower Day. The US have an International Whistleblower Day. South Africa, we celebrate those two. We don't have any in our country. I would recommend that we have the 23rd of August as our South African National Whistleblower Day in honor for Babita, because she indeed has sacrificed, given the ultimate sacrifice of her life.
In these past 4 years, Deokaran's murders tied into an even bigger story of the South African police service and the criminal justice system as we know it, allegedly captured by the very people whom she first outed.
We feel the pain that not only have we lost millions that should have gone to where healthcare should go, but that people have got away with this. And that's the tragedy here, and it just makes us sick, quite frankly.
Stay tuned as Wicks is joined by fellow SAA corruption whistleblower Cynthia Stimple and Outer CEO Wayne Duvenage in a critical panel discussion on Babita's legacy next.
To know when the next episode drops, hit the like, follow and subscribe buttons on our YouTube, Spotify and Apple Podcast channels.
Want to weigh in on the discussion? Drop us a voice note on 072 562 3179. My name's Graham Robenheimer, your host. Let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News 24. How's it, Jeff? Lucky to see you again. If you may, take us back to that fateful day, some very nearly 4 years ago. Where were you at the time? Do you recall getting the news?
The 23rd of August 2021 was a Monday. And if we cast our minds back that far, as difficult as it may be, we were still in the grips of the COVID-19 pandemic, as it was then called Adjusted Alert Level 3. So movement was still difficult. And the strictures of those controls to curb the spread of the virus were still in place. And Babita Deokaran was working from home. She had just taken her daughter and dropped her at school. She'd stopped at the Checkers on the way back to her house, and she bought groceries. And as she left the complex, she was followed. And when she finally nosed her car into her driveway, the white BMW pulled up alongside her, and 3 men peppered her car with bullets. She was shot 12 times. And her siblings were amongst the first people to find her at the scene, being attended to by paramedics, and she was rushed to hospital. And she took her last breaths surrounded by her family when they turned the life support machines off. And, it's always a difficult time of year, especially for her family, because, the horror and the grief and the trauma is once again dredged up to the surface, and they have to relive her final day. I think something that they take solace in is that her sacrifice has not been forgotten, certainly not in the 4 years since she died. And the reality is that she died for a greater purpose. We investigated her death, and several months after she was killed, we managed to reveal that in the weeks before her death, she'd filed a report in which she'd flagged 850 million rand in suspicious payments out of Tembisa Hospital and halted 100 million rand in outgoing funds to these suppliers. And I firmly believe, and the general consensus is that was a singular document that cost her life. And the upright stance that she took and her posture in refusing to look the other way when money was literally flooding out of state coffers, enabled by officials at Tembisa Hospital to shell companies and the politically connected elite who hid behind these facades, she was killed and she was eliminated. And I think that's the backdrop of our discussion today. And whenever this anniversary rolls around, it gives us an opportunity to take stock and to say, well, Babita died for a purpose. Has justice been served? Has her family seen justice? And it's an incredibly difficult question to answer in a linear fashion. but I think it would insult her memory to say that she died in vain. For me, not least, her sacrifice has led to the dismantling of one of the most complex extraction and money laundering syndicates we've ever seen, which has been focused on state procurement. And in essence, if she had not been killed, and if we had not pushed the story to the front of people's minds, those syndicates would still be in operation, feasting at the Tembisa Hospital trough.
Right. Jeff, we're going to get to our panelists in the next short while. I just wanted to also get this from you before that. Just how challenging was it after Babita's murder? And of course, she's not just the subject of a negative news headline. As you say, of course, a big family that still to this day is grieving. How challenging was that initial investigation to get access to some sensitive information, a massive trove of emails that you had to scour through, to point to any new news lead in this particular story? How difficult was that? Because essentially, as it stands, Jeff, you've picked up from her investigations.
When we succeeded, we really managed to break this thing open. And the panacea for us came when we got access to 60,000 emails, which were contained on her laptop, and also a forensic image of her cell phone. So putting the two together allowed us to really dive into the minutiae of her life and also develop a sketch of what the last month of her life looked like. And it was an arduous project, investigative journalism often is. You're drowning in paperwork and spreadsheets and the like, but I would always have more information as opposed to less. And when we got access to that database, it allowed us to really rip this thing completely apart. We could see exactly what Tembisa Hospital was spending and on what, and who the ultimate beneficiaries of this cash was. And when we first got access to the database, I'll never forget it. I was sitting in the conference room of a company in Pretoria, and there was a large screen projected onto the wall. And there's just this scroll bar disappears into nothing because there's literally that many emails, all nonsensical. But all it took was typing Tembisa Hospital into the search bar, and we found her report, which was filed on the 4th of August to her boss. It was headlined, "Possible Fraudulent Transactions Identified." And that codified her concerns. And those concerns were Tembisa was spending more money than it had. In the space of 4 months, it had processed 1,203 individual purchase orders worth 850 million rand. Now, that's incredible because in the next 9 largest hospitals combined, that figure was exponentially more than all of their combined procurement. And what Babita also did was left us a digital trail to follow. Appended to that report was a list of 217 companies she wanted investigated. And that singular document became our starting point. And from there, we were able to rip apart exactly who was behind these companies, because up until that point, it had been kept a secret.
While joining us now into this discussion is Cynthia Stimple, of course, an author, a whistleblower herself of a particular book called Hijackers on Board during her time at the SAA, also railing against allegedly dodgy deals there. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us. You fought strongly against capture attempts there, the dodgy SAA and BNP Capital deal. I would, the inflection point, if you will. Take us through your story, if you could, please, Cynthia. And I'm sure it could be quite long, but how do you find it reflects with Babita's story, if at all?
Thank you very much, Graham. So yes, my story happened in 2016, where I initially raised, in fact, many concerns like Babita. I'll draw the parallels. Babita raised concerns around the payments. I raised concerns around the tender of BNP Capital. Firstly, when we were first asked to go out and tender to source funding, the board interfered and wanted us to add suppliers that were not ordinarily credit rated like the banks, and they weren't part of our system or client list that we provide. The second thing is the board then went ahead and chose FDC, Free State Development Corporate, for our CEO and CFO at the time to sign a deal straight away and enlist them without them going through the RFP process, and then asked me to sign this document and to ratify it, which I also refused. And then the third time was when they brought in BNP Capital, went through the procurement department process, brought them in as a transaction advisor, and their scope at the time was just to review the loans of SAA, review the leases, review its current debt, and look at the balance sheet. It had nothing to do with funding. And the client won, the BNP Capital won this transaction at a fee of 2.6 million. And they then, the CFO, so, again, another parallel was the CFO who changed the scope to enlist BNP Capital to source funding for SA. And then they asked me again to sign this bid adjudication document, which I refused. And I said, it's unethical of us to do this. We need to close this tender now, and we need to start afresh and go back and tell all our service providers, which were all the banks. However, this obviously went further. The board approved it through round robin. And subsequently, I'd reported it already to the chief risk officer at the time and to internal audit in the interim. Then I took it to our executive managers. When nothing happened and when it was finally approved at board, when I tried to stop it, I found that the round robin has been done. And that's when I wrote to National Treasury about it. Obviously, in the interim was that the CEO, CFO were very much part of it, allowed this deal to go through. I then was advised by one of the executives that I'd reported to go to Outa, and Outa sitting right here, and they were the ones who intervened. They're the ones who managed to write, firstly, a letter of demand to the SAA, and subsequently Outa provided me with lawyers to take care of my matter, and they subsequently paid the lawyers. However, it was through the interdict of the lawyers who then got SAA to stop the transaction. And that saved SAA from paying the 256 million, but it didn't even end there. SAA went a step further. They then tried to sign an cancellation clause, and this was approved by board members together with the executive managers just under the 50 million threshold. So it was a 49.9 million cancellation clause to pay the BNP Capital. And because the story was already out in the media, thanks to Outa and the media that worked with Outa at the time, that they realized they couldn't go ahead with the deal and they had to cancel it.
Right. And of course, Cynthia, I mean, you lost your livelihood in the process for speaking out, doing the moral, ethical, correct thing. When you heard of Babita's story, do you remember where you were at the time? Do you remember how you resonated with it? Or was it something like me and many other journalists or South Africans? It took us a while for us to really sink in as Jeff and fellow colleagues really started to get into the nitty-gritties of what was really going on here, that you thought, jeepers, this is a lot more deeper than what I thought it was. Where were you?
At that time, my husband and I were actually taking a road trip down to the Cape. And we had just left Batuli House at the time, and we were on one of those small roads. And we had the radio on, and I heard the news that there was this person that was assassinated. And the storyline, the headline went that it's an attempted assassination. Immediately, I said to my husband, this woman is in finance. She's working in health. I don't think it's an assassination. This is definitely something she would have identified, because the finance people and the auditors and the compliance people should be the first people that will pick up any fraud, especially in finance. And I think she would have done that. And I still said to him, I think this is not. So immediately I identified that this is not just attempted hijacking. It was indeed something that she would have discovered and lost her life for reporting it or speaking to someone internally about it. We went on, obviously, and as we got to our destination at various places, we were watching TV, and if those first 2 days or 3 days, there was even the headline put out, a media statement by the National Health about, she's been, they still didn't say that she had identified any fraud, and that they just said, they suspect it's attempted hijack, and they'd moved out of the department, and that was the headline. And it was only much later, I think a few days later thereafter, then the investigation came out, or at least the story came out, that there was possibly more to it. So for me, do I think that she died in vain? I don't think so. I think Babita was absolutely brave, firstly, and have the courage to stop those transactions and not authorize them. Secondly, she reported it, which was in her right and in her fiduciary duty. She did that. Thirdly, is that her CEO obviously was in cahoots, is the only conclusion I can draw, together with the CFO, because the CEO, Ashley Matunzi, and that's why they didn't act on any safety measure for her when she sent that SMS saying, I think our lives may be at risk. So for me, I followed her story so closely. I was really sad that I wasn't in Johannesburg at the time, because I would have gone directly to her home. It's not far from where my daughter lives in the south. And so what I did, there was a memorial given in that same day, in that same period, where there was a protest done in Johannesburg, and they asked me could I to attend, and I said I couldn't. I'm in the Cape area. But then we held one outside Parliament. It was raining, but there we were, a handful of people standing there with our placards and saying this is not right, that whistleblowers should be protected and that corruption should stop.
Right. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for reflecting on that. And, of course, referencing the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, Wayne Duvenage, often in the headlines for speaking out on various cases of corruption. It really seems like a never-ending carousel of stories these days, especially the News 24 investigations team doing absolutely stellar work, whether it's in Kudaleni or Joburg or wherever. Wayne, reflecting on Babita's story, what is the reality now in 2025 of being a whistleblower in this country? Welcome.
Yeah. Hi, thanks for the invitation. And I just must first commend Jeff for an excellent expose that I think stuff still comes out to this day. And it's been great work. We rely on whistleblowers like Cynthia and investigative journalists to just try and do everything we can to put our finger in the dike and stop this tsunami of corruption which unfolds. It's incessant right now. I say that because we are just inundated with stuff that's happening. I cannot comprehend. If we thought state capture was banned under Jacob Zuma's days, state capture lives on, and it is gross at the moment, and it is permeated purely because you have these networks that have learnt and that there are compromised people in political places, a high political power, and the rule of law cannot flow, because if it did flow, many people in government, right up to cabinet level, would be in jail. And so it's a flow that I think the ANC have lost control of now, because they used to, and still do, but they used to get the lion's share of the money that flows from all these contracts. And I think everybody's just chipping in, which is why it's so costly. So I think, to answer the question, the frustration is for us is the pain that whistleblowers go through. You'll hear Cynthia's story. The ultimate is Babita's story. But we deal with whistleblowers every day who are shunned, who are pushed out of organizations on trumped-up charges, and who suffer, lose their homes, lose their livelihoods, their families break up because of the pressure and the stress. And this is happening so much. And And I don't blame whistleblowers for keeping or people who should and want to blow the whistle for keeping their head down, because it's dangerous, and they lose their jobs, and it's just very, very horrible to see what they go through. I think in as regards the topic of Babita, has she died in vain? In many respects not, but in many respects she has, because we have not seen ultimate accountability here. It doesn't help catching the gunman and not the people who ordered the hit. I've not seen, and I've scoured the internet to find, has the president come out meaningfully and engaged with Jeff Weeks? Has the MEC of Health at the time, has anybody in positions of authority, right up to the Minister of Health, come and thanked him and sat down and brought in the investigators and said, we need to take this matter and hold everyone accountable, close down all of those accounts, all those businesses that prospered? Nothing has happened. Very little, if anything, has happened. And that's the tragedy here, that there are no consequences. And so Babita has died in vain from that perspective, because you would want at least nobody to die, but anybody who has to suffer, and any whistleblowing of this nature, when it is raised, civil society dies. We feel the pain that not only have we lost millions that should have gone to where healthcare should go, but that people have got away with this. And that's the tragedy here. And it just makes us sick, quite frankly.
Can't agree more, Wayne. What's bothering you on this day, the 20th of August 2025, mere days ahead of the exact 4 years since we lost Babita? I can't imagine that the IDT saga, this 800 million rand dodgy oxygen tender. We've now got a City of Johannesburg MMC, Sitombiso Zungu. He's accused of being embroiled in a Johannesburg construction cartel. We've got financial auditors being targeted in the city of Ekurhuleni, Gauteng's East Rand, what have you, name it. It's just not stopping. What's bothering you on today?
It's relentless. So just a couple of things recently unfolding. The new Minister of Higher Education has now put three of the SETAs. The SETAs, by the way, Sectoral Education and Training Authorities, are a cesspool of corruption, 20 billion rand a year. It's just mindless what happens. And after years now, he's put three of these SETAs under administration. He should have put in SETA as well, a fourth one. Construction SETA's been under administration before. And then lo and behold, we hear that two of the administrators are implicated in dubious activities and maladministration in the past. And this is, you start to ask yourself, what is going on here? This is another cadre deployment issue. So we have written to them, and we need to meet with the minister. And then today, just over the last 2 days, when you do have a board that exercises good fiduciary duty, that is not made up of politicians and is made up of professionals and experts in their field, such as that of the South African Tourism Board, when you have that board exercising its fiduciary duties to hold its CEO to account for gross maladministration and irregularities that have been raised by the Auditor General and a forensic report, we celebrate good boards because we don't have enough of those. And when that happens and the minister doesn't engage with the board, instead she fires the board. She fired them this morning or last night. She hasn't engaged meaningfully. They've followed due process. They haven't fired the CEO. They're going through a disciplinary hearing. Then you've got to ask yourself, and this is Patricia de Lille, the minister, you've got to ask yourself, Minister de Lille, what are you doing? This is where political overreach, political interference is grossly out of line. And we have put out a statement now to say, you retract that dismissal of that board. If not, you will face legalities. And the courts have reinstated boards as a result of this political overreach. And so I'm very disappointed in Patricia de Lille now, quite frankly. Sure. And here we have another state entity with its CEO who's now being protected by a minister. She's not allowed to do that. And by the way, this CEO has fired or removed in the last month 4 to 5 executives in the South African SA Tourism executive team. Why? Because they're standing their ground. And so we just see this day after day, month after month, and you have to look to the top and say, President Ramaphosa, if you're serious about fighting corruption, you have to do something now. You cannot sit by and allow this network and this patronage and this pillaging to continue, people's lives to be lost. It's actually sickening, and really, I'm getting frustrated now.
Sure, strong words. Thanks, Wayne, for weighing in on that latest development regarding Patricia de Lille, the minister there, and dissolving the board of directors at the South African Tourism. Jeff, I'd like to bring you back in here because, the argument might be that, okay, something is being done. There's a Madlanga Commission of Inquiry. We hear today that 1st September is the starting date now for public hearings. Apparently, some early meeting was already held with KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Police Commissioner Mhlanhla Mkhwanazi about his claims. Whether or not he'll be the first witness is not confirmed yet, and it might not be the case. But when you first looked at Babita's evidence, and looking close at Tembisa Hospital, a name soon appeared, who's currently in a Pretoria prison. Mr. Vusimusi, the cat Matlala, has been such a prominent figure in the headlines of the last couple of months, a story that you've remained sort of very close to and on top of. Can you remember when you first sort of came across that name? What did it look like? What was the initial evidence, and did you ever believe that it would ever evolve into this, where he's now allegedly part of a network, politically allegedly influencing our top ministers?
Yeah, Graham. I think it was almost prescient, and I think it speaks to the subject matter of our discussion today about the vanity or not of Babita's death. And the reality is, when we talk about Vusimuzi Cat Matlala, we must understand that Babita was the first person to put him on anyone's radar. He had 3 companies on that list of 217 entities that she'd flagged. 5 million rand of the 100 million rand she had frozen was on its way to him. And she essentially placed him on our radar. And just to touch on Wayne's earlier point about, where we are now, I think it's worthy to sort of examine how the Gauteng Health Department has come along since Babita's murder. So, she obviously froze payments and called for an investigation. She was lied to by her boss, and as soon as she was dead, the payments were unfrozen and there was no investigation. When we exposed all of this, obviously that brought the entire house of cards crashing down, but very little has actually changed in the Gauteng Department of Health. As recently as December last year, the Gauteng Health Department is on the fringes of being bankrupt. The HOD had to send out a communique to all hospital managers to say, pull funds from projects which are being underutilized because the amount we're spending cannot be sustained, sure, and they're cash strapped. And how that manifests is in the appearance and the operations of Gauteng's public health network. The hospitals are falling apart. They are cesspits and absolutely disgusting. And Babita had stumbled across a very interesting modus operandi in the way cash was extracted when it was just beneath the 500,000 rand threshold. Above that would trigger a more rigorous public tender process. But you say, okay, well, have we closed the door since then? No, we haven't. That delegation of authority has been increased to 1 million rand per transaction. So now more money can be spent without rigorous oversight. And again, Wayne spoke, aptly about the fact that no one has been held responsible for her murder beyond the 6 shooters. 6 isn't Kabio, completely disposable pawns in a deadly game. We've not seen any sort of mastermind arrested. The Hawks made no effort whatsoever to investigate beyond the 6 hitmen. And it's now been 1,459 days that the mastermind of a killing has remained free. That's on the murder side of things. On the corruption side of things, we've got the SIU and the Hawks leading parallel corruption investigations that have now been running for nearly 2.5 to 3 years. We understand that these are complex probes, and money laundering of this nature is not insignificant. They're looking at upwards of 12,000 individual transactions, thousands of entities that cash was laundered through. And so these are complex investigations, but it points to a dearth of capacity within our law enforcement agencies that such an important investigation can stretch on for so long. I mean, because in a just, sane world, this is a complex investigation, but it's not a 3-year investigation. And the anniversary, again, provides us with an opportunity to go to these arms of the state and say, well, okay, where are we now? How much longer must Babita Deokaran's family wait for justice? We can go to people like the Hawks and say, well, you intentionally waylaid this investigation after Babita Deokaran was murdered. The best that you could come up with was convicting the 6 hitmen through a plea and sentencing agreement. But what of beyond that? What about the people they were liaising with, the intermediaries and the proxies, which led them to the paymaster? We've seen none of that. And that besmirches Babita Deokaran's legacy. And really, if we're talking about accountability, there's been a patent lack of it here in this case.
You're listening to the latest edition of The Lead on News 24 with Graham Rowenheimer. If you've got an opinion on what you've heard so far, drop us a short voice note on our WhatsApp hotline. That's 072 562 3179.
Welcome back. My name's Graham Robe, and I'm in conversation now with an expert panel of my fellow colleague, investigative journalist Jeff Wicks, as well as the CEO of the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, OTA, that's Wayne Duvenage, and fellow whistleblower and author Cynthia Stimple, as we mark very nearly 4 years since we lost Babita, asking the question, did she die in vain? Let's pick up on Jeff's last point before the break. Jeff, to your point, the cat wasn't, he wasn't sort of arrested for anything to do with Babita. He was arrested for a completely different case, and notwithstanding taking any sort of merit from that particular case, there is just no accountability. Cynthia, I would love to bring you in here just about creating some sort of protection, if you will, for whistleblowers in today's day and age. One of the strong recommendations from the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, as we albeit enter into another commission, was to create better legislation to protect whistleblowers. I think it's still under review, correct me if I'm wrong. Where do we sit now at the moment with the Whistleblower Protection Bill? And are you confident about its aims?
Thank you for this question, Graham. So in June 2023 already, the Department of Justice put out a discussion paper, and many civil society organizations, together with legal firms, responded to that. And the deadline was the 15th of August. Nothing has transpired since then. 2024, there was no word from the DOJ, except that they are working on it. There was, in various forums that I've attended, even as early as this year, when there was a Whistleblower Protection Summit run by NACAC and PLAF, the DOJ were present, a representative there, and said that they are very close to finalizing it, that it will be presented shortly. A commitment was extracted at that time saying, can they finalize it by the end of this year? And they said they would. In February, with the State of the Nation address, our President Ramaphosa said he will finalize the legislation and ensure that whistleblowers are protected. To date, there's been nothing in the media, nothing that's been put out to people to look at, whether it was a white paper or a draft legal legislation already on protection of whistleblower. To date, nothing. Even though we may have the best legislation, and it is set out and sent out to everyone, and it's in our government gazette, our major problem is the enforcement of legislation. We saw with the current Protected Disclosures Act, there was only one detriment stated, no occupational detriment, meaning the person who speaks out should not have lost their jobs. Yet every single whistleblower loses their jobs. Those that don't lose it, like Babita Deokaran, Mumfo Mapele, they get shot, they get killed, because they're the ones who have raised issues internally, discussed it with senior managers, and they decided the quickest way to close this matter is to get rid of the person. So do I have any faith in it? I would still recommend that we do get the legislation out, because at least it is a methodology that organizations, civil society, especially state-owned entities in government, and the private sector can adhere to. Because right now there's nothing that allows them to change behavior and decide that we're not going to continue corruption, because there's corruption in both private and public. In my experience is that there's even in civil societies that state that they're helping either for humanitarian reasons or helping whistleblowers or helping any type of organization, and they themselves are perpetrating fraud. So it seems to be in our DNA, and that is the challenge. How do we change behavior? We can have the legislations in place, but they must be enforced, one, and two, we have to change the behavior around it, the education and training around how do we start shifting our weight to stopping corruption effectively. How do we hold people accountable? As Jeff said, he hasn't seen that. We haven't seen it as a country. Nowhere is the accountability as high level in the cabinet ministers. Some of them end up even being in parliament, we've seen, because there's been no accountability. So our challenge, I think, is more how do we start holding people accountable?
When you deal with the daily realities of this, do you think this legislation, once passed, finalized, what have you, will be a game changer in your experience?
Yeah, one hopes so. But it is, as Cynthia says, it's about enforcement and, the implementation of it. I think part of our problem is that the criminal justice system is just under massive pressure. It's not capacitated enough. And again, I said it earlier, I point to this fact that if the president was serious about fighting corruption, we've always said, give 10 billion rand to the criminal justice system and you'll get tenfold in return to the country, just because you start to close down these networks. But I don't say throw money and people at the problem. Do it really constructively through making sure that the systems are in place, that the forensic capacity of the NPA, the Investigating Directorate, SARS has a big role to play, all of them talking together, not working in silos, we know. And then getting international assistance and putting systems in and digitizing. We know that if you put a concerted effort into that space and a little bit of funds, call it an investment, we will start to get on top of corruption in this country. We'll start to have money flowing to the protection of whistleblowers and make it good for whistleblowers and to come forward and safe to do so and report the crimes. And unless we unlock that and open those doors and tackle it seriously, we're going to be hemorrhaging and stuck in this space for a long time. And so I keep going back to the president. It sits at your feet. And if this continues, as I was saying earlier in Jeff Wick's case in Babita's matter, if the president was serious about it, that matter, just Babita's assassination, should have been given all the resources to get to the bottom of it and nothing happened. So you've got to ask yourself, well, if you're not doing what society expects of you, what normal morals expect of you, then you are the problem. You know something that you don't want exposed. And so I accuse the president of being the perpetrator of the corruption that continues in this country because he's doing nothing about it when he knows he can and should do a lot more. So I'm not sure whether the law is going to be the panacea to the problem and just solve it all. I mean, we've seen this very often. You can pass acts, but it's all about implementation. So the law doesn't just trigger and makes everything fall into place. We've got to have the resources to deal with this issue.
Jeff, your input here as we head to another commission of inquiry, broadening the scope of what the Zondo Commission had already looked at, sure. And, the discussion point here is one of the strong recommendations of that. Here we have another commission that may potentially be, who knows, another 3 years long before we get to any strong recommendations again. In the meantime, the status quo continues.
Absolutely, and I think it speaks to the trope of accountability or lack of accountability when we discuss a persona like Kat Matlala. So, we named him. We exposed him as being a beneficiary of dubious Tembisa money. That stench of corruption did nothing to dampen his tender aspirations. And a year and a half after we wrote about him, he scored a 360 million rand tender from the SAPS, the same organization that is meant to be investigating him for procurement corruption. It's very difficult to make sense of, but it's a prime example of how accountability has been completely cast by the wayside. We know that some of the companies that were making money from Tembisa Hospital, that Babita Deokaran flag, continue to make money. They up until recently, earlier this year, they are still scoring contracts from the Gauteng Department of Health. And we have to think about the message that sends to potential perpetrators. It says, you can steal this money, and even if you are caught, nothing will happen to you. Worst case scenario, you maybe stop getting state work, but the status quo, as evidenced by Kat Matlala, is that you will in fact get larger tenders. And I mean, the SAPS tender has now been cancelled, but only because we made such a noise about it that made it impossible for people to ignore. And when we talk about this commission that's coming, it's extremely important work, and it's important work for many reasons. South Africa is burdened by a crime rate that rivals war zones. That's never been in dispute. And at the same time, we have a South African police service that cannot deliver on its constitutional mandate. And the reason why I say that is because their own murder detection rate is set at 11%. That means that the high watermark for them is we will be able to solve 1 in 10 murders. What happens to the other 9 families? Babita Deokaran's family is among those 9 families. And, just really to think about how far we've come, I'd hoped that Babita's murder, and as public we made it, would be a catalyst for change and a catalyst for reform. Maybe the president would get involved. Maybe we would finally have some effort to staunch the outflow of cash via the state's 1 trillion rand per annum procurement. That has not happened. The modus operandi occurred at Tembisa, and it's been replicated elsewhere, not only in other hospitals, but we've seen it at Eskom, we've seen it at SAA, we've seen it all over the place where people are paying 88,000 rand for knee pads, and Wayne mentioned it earlier that we thought capture was bad under the Guptas. He's absolutely right. It endures. And, the thing about capture in the Gupta epoch was that we had very easily definable villains, and we could point to this and they are connected to these politicians. But the real capture happens at municipalities, at public libraries, at clinics, where prices are continuously inflated, where the tax rand is diverted from its intended destination. And the people who suffer, yet again, are the poorest of the poor. And we know that public procurement is a site of extraction. It's trite by this point. Why in 2025 do we still have a paper-based procurement system that is so open to being corrupted? It's because there's no political will to change it. And I sat with the SIU head, Andy Motibi, last year, and I was frank with him, and I said, do you not think that people are stealing money now faster than it can be recovered? And he agreed. And that is because the disjointed approach of law enforcement means accountability is often out of reach. And where is the deterrent in this for the corrupt in our society, for the profiteers who will gladly spend hundreds of millions of rands on palatial mansions and supercars, money that was meant to save the lives of the poor and destitute Tembisa patients? It takes a special kind of psychopath to do that. But they carry on doing it because they're allowed to do it, because there are no consequences. It's disgusting, if I'm honest.
100%. I'd like to read out some of our comments from the News 24 cast of thousands. We just got this beautiful message in, Jeff. Kudos to Jeff for staying on this story for as long as it takes. We got this other comment here. Justice has to prevail. The president can easily call on commissions, for example. South Africa needs to get the best detectives to work on this case. It's very deep-rooted, gone too far, and it was allowed by ANC. Just a comment on that. I mean, we've already seen comment from Pop Crew, the policing union, that up to one detective, right, Jeff, can have up to 600 cases at a time. That's the reality in South Africa. And then another comment from the News 24 cast of thousands. There's an extraordinary passivity in our dear leaders. Is it guilt, fear, shame, substances, carelessness? Who knows? Jeff, is the aftermath of what happened to Babita what we know about Vusi Musi at the moment? We've seen, pictures tell 1,000 stories about Vusi Musi being at fellow tenderpreneur Edwin Sodi's 50th birthday party, other senior ANC members pictured there. Is the story done, or are we only getting started?
No, I truly believe, Graham, that Babita's legacy lives on with the accountability or shades of accountability that we're seeing now through this commission, through further investigations where people are being brought to book for murders that had long gone cold. I think it's pivotally important, and Babita's fingerprints are on that. And, I think her family can take heart of that. If it wasn't for her, these same syndicates would still be consuming public funds. That goes without saying. She was the only disruptor there, and she paid the ultimate price for that disruption with her life. I think that the country owes her a great debt because, what she exposed, the first signs of this extraction network, number one, in a modus operandi that we'd seldom seen in such detail before, that helps us close the loopholes, or it should, with the lawmakers, help them close all the loopholes. We need to root out corrupt and pliant civil servants from the civil service. That's what Babita did. She gave us an exemplar of a civil servant who actually serves. And, I was asked this morning, do I ever lose hope? Of course. I often feel beaten down by this because, bear in mind the work that we do, the golden thread through all of it is corruption. I'm sick of it. In an ideal world, there should be no need for me, but we are here. And the point of us pursuing Babita's story was that we finished what she started. Her life was cut short and she could literally do no more. She was blocked, she followed procedure, and she was eliminated for her uprightness. The Gauteng Health Department had no control over me, and I showed them that. And I'll continue to show them that because they need to understand that they are still being watched. This year, the sitting Gauteng Health MEC, her friend and fellow ANC branch member scored a wonderful multi-million rand tender to provide uniform shirts. Of course, it's a complete coincidence.
I remember the story.
Their friendship has nothing to do with it. But we should not be seeing this anymore. And, I'll issue an open challenge to the Health MEC. Throw open your ledgers and your books. I'll help you recoup money that's been stolen. But I know that won't happen.
Thanks, Jeff. And of course, you picking up Babita's story comes with a lot of personal challenges. It's a heavy burden to carry, and we appreciate that more than you know. And I think, the comments that I've seen on your stories throughout News 24, YouTube, whatever, social media, people are starting to understand that a lot more. Comment that just come through. The problem is that all we're doing is scaring these thieves into hiding their theft better. There's no one going to jail. This perceived lack of accountability, Cynthia, I mean, what gives? What needs to change? Other than legislation? Other than, the president calling another national convention? Your thoughts, please, as we sort of wrap up this conversation.
We definitely need consequence management here, because what's transpired is that as every case is raised, I've seen on the outer side, they've been fighting so long, and yet people aren't brought to book. The Babita case, we've seen the 6 people being arrested. We still don't know who the mastermind is behind this. And every other case that's been reported may get to court and there's a runaround. The Stalingrad attitude is being used. I agree that our courts are overwhelmed, but there's been no solution. How do we improve it? For me, right now, especially with whistleblower cases, I would recommend that we have a tribunal, rather. The Competitions Tribunal works very effectively, and it sits and they decide on it, and there's an outcome, whereas with the whistleblower issues, it has to go through CCMA, go through Labour Court, has to go, and most of whistleblower issues are related to corruption. So that needs to have its own court. I know that Accountability Now is touting for an independent Chapter 9 association for fighting corruption. That's probably one of our solutions. The other would be that when you're dealing with whistleblowers specifically, that their cases get decided on in a specific space of time rather than going through the normal court system. Then there must be consequence management, such as penalization straight away. The minute a CEO is suspended and there's proven that there's corruption around it, they are fined. There must be the penalization straight away, rather than them sitting there with paid leave for 3-4 years and then only the case comes forward. In the case of Lerato Maggio and Ashley Matunzi, they were on 2-year suspension and earning after Babita was killed. Nothing happened. And now I believe that Lerato has resigned. So where was she held accountable? She should have been penalized immediately. There should be whatever has been found, they didn't do their job. They sign an agreement within their organizations that they will do the best that they can for the best interest of the organization. They have that agreement. Then suddenly they resign. So we need to start having that type of enforcement where they immediately, and they must be charged in their personal capacity, not from a government perspective or an organization, because that's how easy it is to resign. The people like Patolo Ramosibudi, all those have all resigned, and no consequences, no accountability. So I would recommend we have to put some stricter recommendations in penalization, enforcement of that they are charged in their personal capacity as directors or executives, and not on the company, where the company pays for their lawyers and protects them. Whereas Babita is concerned, I would like to make a recommendation here that the UK have a national whistleblower day. The US have an international whistleblower day. South Africa, we celebrate those two. We don't have any in our country. I would recommend that we have the 23rd of August as our South African National Whistleblower Day, in honor for Babita, because she indeed has sacrificed, given the ultimate sacrifice of her life, and having opened this can of worms that now is still unfolding through all the investigations that Jeff has been doing.
Absolutely. Cynthia Stimple, thank you so much for that closing comment. I really do appreciate it. And one could even argue that, hey, it would have been better to take all the funds set aside that taxpayers have footed for the National Convention to be used for a fund for whistleblowers to change the moral and ethical fabric of daily South African life. Wayne, I'd like to end with you. We've been getting fantastic comments sort of suggesting thank you to you and Jeff and Cynthia and yourself, Wayne, for the work that you do. Your final closing comments in regards to what Cynthia just said. Perhaps the 23rd of August should be a whistleblower day.
Good idea. And I don't want to repeat what Cynthia said. She's spot on. We need consequences. I just want to end off with this to say that we must never give up hope. So much of what has to be done is going to rely on the relentless pressure brought by civil society, by investigative journalism and whistleblowers alike. So, as frustrating as this space is, we wake up every day at ARTA. There's 37 of us, and we are moved by the fact that we're making a difference. So, having done 340 odd projects and saving the country billions and billions of rands through our exposés and halting of transactions, is a good thing. But it feels sometimes like it's a bit of a tsunami out there, and are we winning? Well, every case and every project is a win, and we must never stop. We must be relentless in the pressure we bring to every single person in positions of power, because let me say this, that when you start to expose corruption and you name people, and I want to commend Adrian Besson. I met with him the other day, and we were talking about getting this wall of shame. We mustn't wait for the restricted suppliers database at Treasury to be updated. We must introduce a citizens restricted supply database. Do not, in other words, to messages to everyone, do not do business with these companies or these individuals, because they, in our eyes, are tainted. And this is the type of ingenuity and innovation and things that we need to introduce to just start working harder at fighting corruption. So I'm upbeat. I mean, we've got an amazing country. We've got so much diversity, so much going for us. We must not let the small, minute handful of thugs out there steal it from us. We've got a lot of work to do because we have to eradicate poverty. We have to get people back into jobs and this economy going. We cannot allow the people who are stealing it from us to take it away. So let's just work harder. And let's just get everybody behind every single initiative that tackles corruption. And again, Jeff, well done. It's been a great expose. Let's keep working hard at this one.
Yeah. And if I can just say one last thing, Graham, I mean, as I look at our screen now, it's whistleblowers, civil society, investigative journalism, and that's often sort of like the bulwark nexus that draws the line between prosperity and chaos. And I mean, as Wayne said, we will continue to be relentless. That's our duty, and we have to do it. And that's for the benefit of all South Africans.
Jeff, absolutely. Before we let you go, The Shadow State, your new book, where and when can we get it? I'd love to get my hands on a copy.
So The Shadow State will be available at all reputable bookstores across the country. It can also be purchased on Amazon and Takealot. And it is part of remembering the person that Babita Deokaran was, so that her story is immortalized, so that everyone knows that her death wasn't in vain.
And you're also doing a couple of book talks, is that right? Do you have any dates at the top of your mind you can share with us, perhaps?
Correct. We'll be in exclusive books at Mall of the South on the 26th of August next week. We'll be at the Killarney Cine Centre on the 27th, and I'll be at exclusive books in Waterfront in Cape Town on the 28th. Into the beginning of September, we're doing 3 launches in Durban. And our final launch, which is very special for me, is taking place at the Green Heights Secondary School in Phoenix, a stone's throw from where Babita grew up. It was the school that she attended, and it was where her body lay in state. And I think it's a fitting tribute to her.
Well, thank you so much to every single person on this expert panel today, as we very nearly mark 4 years since we lost Babita. Thank you so much for all of your analysis, your comments. One of the things I'm sort of taking away with Cynthia, why can't the 23rd of August be Whistleblower Day in South Africa? And also a big thank you to the News 24 cast of thousands here for all of your engagement, for watching and listening to us.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
We hope you enjoyed today's special edition of The Lead for this very robust panel discussion. More to come in future, I'm sure. And keep an eye out for Jeff Wick's new book, The Shadow State. It's definitely one to read. If you've got any voice notes, you'd like to share any thoughts, opinions, perhaps tip-offs in relation to today's discussion, feel free to drop us a voice note or any other messages on our official The Lead WhatsApp line. That's 072 562 3179. Very simply, as we end off, I look forward to a time when corruption in this country is no longer the norm, that accountability becomes our new norm. My name's Graham Robenheim, and so long as there's news, we'll have The Lead.